The room was lit only by the faint glow of a single hanging bulb, swaying gently as if even the air in the operations tent was unsettled. Maps lay scattered across the table corners, weighed down by battered canteens and empty magazines, while radios crackled in the background, sending out bursts of coded chatter that sounded almost like static to anyone without the right ear for it. The men sat in a loose circle, each one marked by lines of fatigue and the faint glaze of adrenaline still running. From their last mission, every face locked on the large, grainy photograph pinned to the center of the table, the target a man wrapped in shadows, even under the harsh zoom of satellite imaging. His position was deep in the heart of hostile territory, surrounded by walls and watchers like layers of steel skin, keeping anyone from getting close. The walls were high. The guards alert the sightlines cut off by buildings and trees that seemed grown with the sole purpose of shielding him from the outside world. The commander leaned over the table, his knuckles pressing into the paper until they whitened. He spoke in a low, controlled voice, outlining the objective in clipped words that carried more weight than volume. This was not a mission. For ordinary soldiers, the approach was impossible. The shot was impossible. The escape route was impossible. It was the kind of job that sounded like a trap, because in truth it might as well have been one. Each man in the tent looked at the map, then looked at the others, a silent agreement passing between them that no one was capable of making this shot, not at this distance, not with the wind patterns and the elevation and the lack of visibility. It was a task built on fantasy. The sniper team. Leader spoke finally, his voice gruff and steady as he shook his head. No one is hitting that. No one, not unless the bullet can bend around buildings and cut through the air like a ghost. The others gave small nods, knowing he was right. Knowing that, even in their world where men were trained to take life from beyond the reach of sight, this was outside the boundary of reality. But then the commander straightened his posture, leaned back slightly, and dropped a name into the air like a stone, into still water. The ripple that went through the tent was instant and undeniable. The name was one most of them had only heard in rumors and whispered campfire talk. A call sign, not a real name because no one seemed to know her real name. Ghost, the commander said, and the word seemed to hang there suspended as if the very sound of it carried its own weight. No one in the room spoke for a moment as the mental images surfaced. Each man, recalling scraps of story heard from someone who claimed to have served alongside her, tales of shots taken from ranges so absurd that the wind itself could not carry them. Tales of kills confirmed only by the sudden absence of a target without any visible source of the round. She was not in the books, not in the official records, but she was in the legend, the living myth among those who worked in shadows. The sniper leader gave a short, dry laugh, shaking his head. She is not real. He muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. The commander met his eyes and said, "She is very real, and she is already on her way." The tent went silent again, the weight of that statement pressing on all of them, because if she was real, and if she was coming, then maybe the impossible shot might not be impossible after all. And yet there was another side to it, because if she was involved, it meant the stakes were higher than anyone had been told, and missions with Ghost always carried a shadow of something larger, something the rest of the unit was never fully briefed on. One of the younger soldiers leaned in, whispering to another, barely moving his lips. They say, "No one ever sees her fire. They say the first thing you notice is the impact, and by then, it is already over." The other soldier nodded almost nervously, glancing toward the flap of the tent as if expecting her to walk in. Right? Then the radios crackled again, bringing a burst of coordinates and static, and the commander tapped the table. "This is where she will be set up. No one will see her. No one will know she is there except me. And maybe not even me." The thought hung in the air like the tension before a storm. This was not just another mission. It was the kind that would leave a mark on every man in the room. The kind that years later they would tell in pieces to people who would half believe and half doubt, knowing the truth was too sharp to hold in bare hands. The maps were folded, the photographs collected, and the mission plans sealed. But even as they moved, to prepare their minds were not on the gear or the route. Their thoughts were on the shadow of a woman somewhere far away, already moving, already calculating, and already waiting for the moment when the world would realize that the shot they said was impossible had already been set in motion. She was known only by a name that was not a name, the sound of it carried through whispered conversations around campfires and mess tents. Ghost, no one could say for certain where she had come from or even which branch had trained her. There were stories of her starting in reconnaissance units, stories of her serving in foreign conflicts as an embedded observer, and stories so wild they involved missions with no official existence. The truth was that no one outside a handful of high command ever knew for sure, and those who did never spoke of it aloud. Her face was not in any file. Her fingerprints were not in any system. Her rifle was custom-built and carried no markings, save for faint scratches on the stock where the wood had darkened. From her hands, those who claimed to have worked alongside her described a presence that was almost unnerving. She spoke little, and when she did, it was usually to ask for information, wind readings, terrain angles, movement patterns. She seemed to move through the world without leaving a trace, never drawing attention until the moment she chose to act. And then it was already too late for whoever was on the receiving end. There was no muzzle flash, no sound that could be tied to her position. The only evidence of her being there was the target falling, as if the world had suddenly decided to erase them. Her skill was not simply in her aim, though her accuracy bordered on the supernatural. It was in the way she thought ahead, layers upon layers. Of prediction, she could account for variables others would never consider: heat rising from rooftops, the subtle sway of a branch in a gust, the faint shimmer of mirage bending light in the distance. She saw them all, factored them all, and when the time came, her bullet did not travel. It simply arrived. The commander who had called her in knew she would accept the mission without question. She had a record of taking on the assignments others turned down, not for the challenge, but because she seemed to understand them in a way no one else did. There was no ego in her work, no need to prove herself to other shooters. She took the shot because it needed to be taken, and once it was done, she vanished as though she had never existed that night. While the sniper team on site argued over wind calculations and possible positions, Ghost was already on the move. She traveled alone. No convoy, no backup. She carried her own gear, stripped down to the essentials. Her pack was light, her rifle disassembled, and stowed in a battered case that looked more like a mechanic's toolbox than a weapon of precision. Her clothing was dull and shapeless, designed to break up her outline. Whether she was standing in shadow or lying prone on a ridge, she did not rush the journey. Every movement was deliberate. She knew the closer she got, the less she could afford to be seen. She stopped in villages and towns that no military maps marked, blending in among merchants and travelers, her eyes constantly scanning. Rooftops, windows, alleys. She was not looking for threats. She was looking for paths. Routes that others would overlook, ways to get into a position where no one would think to look. By the time the sniper team arrived to take up their observation posts, Ghost was already in the area, though no one saw her. There were no signs of her passing, no footprints in the dirt, no bent grass to mark her trail. It was as if she had been there from the start, waiting for the target to appear in her sight line. She never checked in over radio, never sent a signal. Her presence was known only to the commander, and even he was not certain exactly where she was. He only knew that when the time came, she would be there, and the shot would be made, in a world of soldiers and specialists where skill was measured in confirmed hits and range records. Ghost existed outside the numbers. She was the story told in quiet tones when the day was done. The reminder that somewhere out there was someone who could make the impossible happen without asking for recognition, without leaving proof, and without giving anyone the comfort of knowing how she had done it. She was the shadow at the edge of the scope, the whisper in the wind, before the impact and the certainty that by the time you realized she had fired, it was already over. The terrain she moved through was as hostile as the mission itself, jagged ridges and shattered buildings, creating a maze of lines that could either hide her or trap her. Depending on the angle of approach, she assessed everything in a single sweep. Of her sharp eyes, each shadow, each glint of glass, each movement of the wind carrying information she stored and processed, like a computer that never stopped running. She adjusted her clothing and pack weight, distributing it so that nothing would catch on wire or wood. Nothing would alert a guard or trigger a camera. She moved silently as if she were part of the landscape herself, blending in with dust and broken concrete. The air was thick with the scent of diesel and rot from a nearby abandoned village. Yet she noticed the faint trace of smoke from a cooking fire, a bird taking flight across a distant hill, a guard checking the perimeter without even glancing her way. Her rifle was assembled in sections, the pieces she had carried separately, now fitting together like the final moves of a puzzle. She had memorized every millimeter of it, the way the stock aligned with her shoulder, the twist of the barrel, the tension of the trigger, the weight of a single round ready to fly. She checked each adjustment twice, and then again relying on muscle memory more than sight. She did not rush. She could not afford to. Her pulse was steady, her breathing measured. She was a machine and a human at the same time, a contradiction that few could understand. Sun sank lower behind distant hills, casting long shadows that shifted constantly. She calculated the impact of each shadow on her line of sight and the reflection of light off surfaces that might reveal her presence. The wind had shifted twice. In the last hour, she adjusted for each variation: the humidity, the temperature difference between shade and sun. Each factor carefully accounted for. She had trained for years for this very type of scenario when all variables seemed stacked against. A shooter. Yet she moved through them with a grace that made it appear effortless. As she neared the final ridge that would give her the only viable line of sight to the target, she paused, crouched behind a broken wall, scanning the compound below. Cameras flashed in short bursts, and guards walked in predictable patterns, yet even they could not imagine she was there. The terrain that seemed impassable now became her ally. Every twisted beam, every collapsed roof allowed her to approach without detection. She moved slowly, carefully planting her feet like a cat stalking prey. Her rifle slung across her back as she surveyed escape routes and fallback positions, a part of her mind calculating what would happen after the shot had been fired. And she was already gone. The sniper team in the observation post far across the valley were adjusting their scopes, discussing angles and bullet drop charts and distance calculations, unaware that she was already positioned within a few hundred meters of the ideal spot. No one saw her approach. No one knew she had even arrived yet. Her target was about to enter the critical window where a single shot would decide the mission. She crouched in the dust of a ruined courtyard, invisible to the naked eye, her form broken up by stone and metal and shadow. Her heartbeat perfectly controlled, as if synchronized with the slow sway of the treetops. She checked her scope one last time, tracing the path of the wind, the flicker of a guard patrolling, the perimeter, the movement of leaves on the far edge of the compound, the way the late sunlight glinted off the metal roof. She adjusted the elevation dial, then the focus, then the trigger weight, every movement practiced hundreds of times yet tailored. For this exact moment, the bullet she would fire was not simply a projectile, it was the culmination of experience, knowledge, intuition, and patience compressed into a single instant of inevitable consequence. The world seemed to hold its breath around her, the distant radio chatter, the faint hum of vehicles on a nearby road. Even the shifting clouds above all faded into irrelevance as her entire being focused on the target, the sniper team discussing impossibilities, the commander watching from afar. None could imagine the quiet figure waiting in the rubble, calculating the impossible, the precision required to make a shot so far away under conditions so unpredictable seemed like a fantasy. Yet there she was, an invisible presence with a singular purpose and the patience of a predator. She inhaled slowly and exhaled just as measured her finger hovered above the trigger, the scope aligned with the target as if the universe itself had bent to her will, all calculations converging in one final moment. Nothing else existed except her position, the target, and the distance separating them. And in that suspended moment, the impossible began to feel inevitable. She did not think about recognition or fame or consequence. She only thought about execution precision and the certainty that by the time anyone realized she had fired, it would already be over. Hours passed, with the sun sinking lower behind distant hills, casting long shadows across the compound and the surrounding terrain. The sniper team in the observation post adjusted their scopes and recalculated trajectories, whispering about wind, shifts, and bullet drop. None of them knew she was already in position, a few hundred meters closer than anyone imagined, crouched behind the jagged remnants of a collapsed wall. Her rifle carefully balanced, her eyes tracking every movement below. The target remained unaware of the shadow that waited above, like a predator unseen and unstoppable. She studied the guards, their timing, their routines, the rotation of cameras and sensors. Even the flutter of a curtain in a distant window gave her data she processed at lightning speed, each detail feeding the inevitable plan in her mind. She shifted slightly, checking her footing. The rubble beneath her was uneven, but she had memorized the terrain from previous reconnaissance. Her boots barely made a sound. Dust rose in tiny wisps, but even that was calculated to fall in the shadows. Nothing could betray her presence. Her breath was steady and deliberate, the rhythm of inhalation and exhalation controlled by years of training in conditions far harsher than this. She did not allow herself to think about the danger or the consequences. She thought only about the shot, the calculations, the variables she controlled, and the ones she could not. She embraced both, knowing the impossible was a test of mind and body, and patience and skill combined. The target moved into what she had predicted. The window of opportunity opened as guards shifted positions, glanced briefly toward the edge of a roof, and moved on, unaware of the invisible eye that followed every twitch and step. She traced the path of a bullet in her mind, its flight arc the wind. She had measured the minor differences in air density between shade and sunlight, the subtle change in temperature across the courtyard, the way light bounced off metal and concrete. She did not need to visualize, she felt it. She knew it, and the rifle responded perfectly, every adjustment preloaded into muscle memory. She glanced at the horizon where the sniper team was stationed miles away. Unaware that the impossible was about to happen, they argued about angles and distances, doubting the shot could ever be made. They were experts themselves, trained to trust only data and calculation, but they did not account for her presence. For the way she moved through variables like water, through cracks unseen yet inevitable. She could have called it in from a safe distance, used a more conventional line of fire, but that was not her method. She relied on skill and patience and the intimate knowledge that in that moment she was the only factor that mattered. Time slowed in the broken courtyard as her finger hovered near the trigger, the bullet loaded and ready, the rifle aligned to perfection, the wind a subtle whisper across her cheek, her eyes locked on the faint shadow of the target under the harsh afternoon sun. Every possible distraction ignored, she was a singular point of focus, the world contracting around her position until nothing existed outside the rifle scope. The target, the distance, and the infinitesimal adjustment needed to make what others said was impossible, absolute certainty. Behind her eyes were sharp and calculating. She scanned for alternative threats, for any change in the environment that might affect the shot. She measured the vibration of the ruined floorboards beneath her hand, the subtle shift of a breeze through the trees, the movement of dust particles in the sunlight, every element accounted for, yet not a single movement betrayed her existence. She could have become part of the air, part of the shadows, part of the earth itself, and in that invisibility lay her power. The sniper team across the valley did not know she was there, and even if they had seen her, they would have dismissed it as luck or trickery because her skill defied understanding. The compound was alive with routine, unaware of the storm that waited above them. Every patrol, every glance, every mundane action was data for her to process 1,000 possibilities. Considered and discarded every moment, reinforcing the inevitability of the shot. She was not tense, she was not nervous, she was patience incarnate, waiting for the precise moment when all variables would converge, when calculation and instinct and training would intersect, and in that fleeting instant, the impossible would no longer be impossible. The shadow above them would decide the outcome and vanish, leaving only results for the rest of the world to react to, even as the sun dipped lower and long shadows merged into one another. She maintained absolute control, her body still, her mind sharp, her senses attuned to the slightest movement, the rhythm of the target, the placement of the guards, the subtle shifts of light on distant walls. She anticipated the target's next step before it happened, adjusting for every minor fluctuation, knowing that the window would not remain open forever, that patience itself was a weapon that needed to be wielded with precision. She could wait. She had waited for years for moments like this, training, practicing missions unseen and unrecorded, until the day she would make the impossible shot and leave no evidence except the result. The moment arrived as if the universe itself had slowed. The target shifted slightly, exposing the vital window she had calculated every second, every micro-adjustment in her mind. Her rifle steady as a part of her body, not separate, not foreign, her. Breathing synchronized with the sway of the ruined wall beneath her. She did not think about danger or consequence, only about trajectory, wind, and distance. The sniper team miles away discussed impossibilities, unaware that the impossible was about to be made manifest. She adjusted the scope. One final time, tracing the path of the bullet before it even left the barrel. Her finger pressed the trigger gently, not quickly, not forcefully. The shot left the barrel with a sound so minimal it was lost. In the background noise of distant engines, rustling leaves, and shifting dust, the round traveled faster than expectation and impossibly straight, like it ignored the constraints that physics should have imposed. It arced through the air silently, invisible and unstoppable. The target continued to move, oblivious to the invisible force approaching them. A guard glanced in the wrong direction. A bird startled into flight, but the bullet ignored them both. It was guided by calculation, instinct, and experience converging in a single lethal moment. In the observation post far across the valley, the sniper team watched the compound, waiting for the expected sound, for the expected impact, for the data to register on their instruments. But nothing. Came no flash, no report, no visible projectile, only a faint stir in the air, as if the world itself had shifted slightly, and then the target jerked violently. The guard nearest him froze mid-step, scanning rooftops, scanning windows, scanning shadows. That revealed nothing, and then the man collapsed. The sniper team sat in stunned silence, their calculations shattered, their doubt confirmed and destroyed simultaneously. They argued over what they had just seen and what they had not seen. They had not seen the shooter, and yet the shot had already landed. Ghost did not move immediately. She waited, watching the result of her calculations unfold. The body hit the ground. The guards panicked a few seconds too late, their reactions meaningless against the precision of her execution. She lowered the rifle slightly, checking the alignment again. The moment had passed, and she had accomplished what everyone had said could not be done. There was no time to celebrate, no recognition, no acknowledgement. Her role invisible. She became part of the shadows once more, a ghost in the literal sense, leaving only the impact for the world to see. The guards scrambled. They shouted orders. They looked for the shooter, for a visible threat, for any sign of presence. But there was none. Every pathway she had used, Every shadow she had exploited now hid her from their view. The sniper team, still miles away, tried to reconcile the data on their scopes with the physical reality before them. The impossible had happened. A target taken down without a single observer detecting the shooter, the round had arrived before anyone had even perceived it, leaving only disbelief and awe in its wake. She disassembled her rifle piece by piece, methodically placing each segment into the custom case. She carried every movement calculated and precise, leaving no trace, no fingerprints, no evidence of presence, only the echo of a shot that had already been forgotten in its immediate chaos. She moved toward the extraction route. She had memorized every turn, every obstacle accounted for. She was already several steps ahead of anyone who might attempt to pursue her path. Obscured by rubble walls and shadows, she did not run. She moved with purpose and patience, as if every step were another calculation in a sequence too complex for ordinary men to comprehend. The compound below descended into chaos. The target was down. The guards confused the patrols, disrupted, and the radio chatter heightened with panic, yet none knew why. None could trace the source of the precision strike. They speculated about drones, about unknown long-range weapons, about luck, about fluke coincidence. But Ghost had no need for explanation, no need for recognition. Her work was complete. She had executed, with skill, patience, and perfect timing, leaving only results for others to react to. By the time the sniper team gathered themselves to attempt an analysis, she had vanished into the landscape, miles of ridges, hills, and broken structures between her. And anyone who might have followed her movements, she was already moving through paths they could never calculate, blending into the debris and shadows like a phantom who had existed only to make the impossible possible. The story would grow in whispers among units and command posts. No one fully understanding what had happened, only knowing that someone had achieved what none believed could be achieved. Her heartbeat slowed. She exhaled gently, her body calm, her mind focused on the next stage, the extraction, the return to safety. Every movement practiced, every contingency anticipated. She was alive in the moment, but already prepared for what would come next. She had become the embodiment of precision, patience, and inevitability. The impossible shot, complete before anyone even knew she had fired, the legend of Ghost would grow that day, and every unit would speak of the silent figure who could make the improbable absolute. Ghost moved through the broken landscape like she was part of it. Every step measured, every movement calculated. The ruined buildings provided cover, the jagged ridges offered concealment, and the shadows became her allies as she navigated the debris. Of a world that had no knowledge of her presence, she did not hurry, she did not panic. She moved with the certainty of someone who had been trained to exist unseen, to become invisible in the chaos that others created. Every loose brick, every shattered window, every fallen beam she passed was accounted for as if they were part of her body, part of her mind, guiding her away from detection. The extraction route she had memorized years before was a series of paths only she could recognize, every landmark noted, every possible observer accounted for. She passed through alleys and courtyards empty and crumbling from neglect, every footstep muted against the rubble. The wind whispered around her, carrying scents and sounds she catalogued effortlessly. The faint hint of cooking smoke, the distant chatter of guards regrouping in confusion, the soft scuttle of rats across broken beams, each element processed in real time, feeding into the perfect pattern of escape. She was a ghost, in the literal sense, unseen, untouchable, untethered by time or expectation. Behind her, the compound descended into disarray. The target eliminated, the guards reacting too late to comprehend the precision. The sniper team miles away, struggling to reconcile what they saw. With what they understood, nothing made sense to them, and yet the results were undeniable. The impossible had been achieved, and no one could trace the hand that had guided it to fruition. Radios crackled with confusion, orders shouted, and coordination attempted. But by then she had already left the area. They had no idea where she had been, no idea where she was going, no idea how someone could exist with such skill and vanish like smoke. Ghost paused briefly on a ridge overlooking the perimeter, the sun dipping low over distant hills, casting long shadows across the terrain. She scanned her route again, every path, every obstacle, every potential witness catalogued, and then she moved again, descending carefully through the ruins, slipping past debris piles and broken walls. She became part of the environment, the wind and light hiding her movements, the earth carrying her footprints away before they could be seen, the rifle already partially disassembled and secured in her pack. Nothing visible to suggest her presence, nothing to mark the passage she had taken. The sniper team, still watching from afar, speculated about drones, about automated systems, about flukes and coincidences. They recalculated and argued, trying to find an explanation for what had occurred, but every possible scenario fell short. The skill required exceeded their understanding. They could not account for it because the shooter was beyond their comprehension. Ghost had removed herself from their equation before. Anyone even had the chance to notice she had existed in their calculations at all. She navigated the labyrinth of rubble with the patience of a predator. The faintest change in shadow noted the smallest shift in wind accounted for. She moved in bursts of silence that mimicked the natural rhythm of the world around her, each breath and step in perfect harmony with the environment, as if she had always belonged there and had only been waiting for the right moment to act and vanish once more. The extraction was not merely a retreat, it was an extension of the precision she had displayed in the shot itself. Every choice, deliberate, every path, optimal, every variable anticipated. Hours passed as she moved across ridges and through empty villages, each step avoiding roads and paths that could reveal her presence. She did not stop for rest or sustenance because she had anticipated this journey in its entirety, every contingency prepared, for every obstacle memorized. She moved with the patience of someone who had no need to rush because the mission had already succeeded. The world would only recognize the results and not the effort or presence that had created them. The legend of Ghost would grow in whispers because no one would ever see the full truth. By the time she reached the final extraction point, the sky was dark. The only light, the faint glow of stars and distant fires from the compound below. She paused once more, assessing her surroundings. The silence profound, the landscape. Still as if holding its breath, she melted into the shadows. Her body perfectly attuned to the night and to the environment, she became indistinguishable from darkness, from rubble, from the very world she moved through, a phantom, carrying the knowledge of the impossible shot she had made, leaving only the story of impact behind for others to react to. Back at base, reports were filed, and messages sent, speculation rampant. Yet no one could confirm the presence of the shooter. Only the results were known. The sniper team and the command watched in awe and disbelief as the impossible had been executed with perfect timing and vanished without trace. Ghost had done what no one thought possible, and by the time they pieced together even fragments of her work, she had already moved on, existing only as a whisper in the minds of those who had witnessed the results and would never forget the silent figure who had changed the definition of impossible forever. Back at base, the story of the impossible shot spread like fire through dry grass. Whispers carried in corridors and mess halls. The sniper team, still struggling to comprehend what had happened, repeated the tale with disbelief and awe, each telling slightly altered but never diminishing the essence of what they had witnessed. The shot had landed before anyone realized she had fired. The bullet had arrived with deadly precision. The target eliminated the guards left scrambling and no one able to identify the shooter, yet everyone knew she existed, and that knowledge was enough to stir fear and respect among soldiers who prided themselves on knowing all variables. Reports filtered up the chain of command, some official, some informal, each attempting to rationalize what had occurred. Analysts recalculated distances, wind velocities, and bullet trajectories multiple times, only to arrive at the same impossible conclusion. The only explanation was a shooter beyond comprehension, an operative, with skill so refined and experience so vast that the impossible became achievable. Her presence in the field invisible, her method unknowable. The sniper team themselves admitted in private that even their own training could not account for the precision or timing. The execution had been flawless, the preparation meticulous, and the extraction seamless, leaving behind only questions and a growing legend that would ripple across units and theaters of operation for years. Veterans who had faced her in exercises or rumors spoke in hushed tones of ghost, a figure who existed more as myth than flesh. She became the measure against which all others were compared. The impossible became the standard by which they gauged skill and patience. Her method of eliminating a target without detection became the benchmark of phantom operations. Her name whispered in briefing rooms and mess halls like a ghost story with teeth, a cautionary tale for those who underestimated the art of invisibility and the precision of a mind trained to see variables where others saw chaos. Commanders debated her inclusion in further missions, her reputation preceding her, and yet her presence defied the standard chain of command. She did not report in conventional ways. She did not leave logs. Her skill removed her from accountability and bureaucracy. Her success was absolute, and her visibility nil. She existed in the shadows and operated by instinct and training alone. The impossible shot had solidified her legend, the mission she had completed without recognition or applause, now becoming the cornerstone of tales whispered among those who understood the cost and precision of true skill. In the field, units adjusted their expectations after hearing the story. Soldiers spoke of her as if she were a presence watching even when unseen. The notion that a single figure could eliminate a high-value target with no warning altered the psychology of those who would face the unknown. She became a symbol of patience and lethal efficiency, a reminder that skill beyond comprehension could exist, and that the unexpected could arrive silently and vanish without trace. The impossible was no longer theoretical. It was proven, and Ghost embodied it completely. Back at the observation post, the sniper team still replayed the event in their minds, analyzing every frame in slow motion, imagining how the shot had traveled so perfectly across impossible distance, how every variable had been accounted for, and yet, how they had been blind to her presence. The bullet had struck with finality. Before anyone knew, she had fired the extraction completed flawlessly, and yet the psychological impact lingered longer than any bullet could. The awareness that someone capable of such precision was still out there, operating beyond detection, left them unsettled and in awe. Whispers reached allied units and even rival intelligence analysts, speculating about the operative responsible. The name Ghost began circulating. As both legend and warning across classified channels, she became a measure of fear and respect, the kind of figure soldiers tell stories about to keep focus sharp and caution keen in hostile environments. Every detail of her impossible shot retold. With reverence and disbelief, her precision unmatched, her patience unwavering, and her invisibility complete. The impact of her actions extended far beyond the single target. The impossible had been made real, and the operative responsible would continue to haunt strategy sessions and war games for years. In quiet moments at base, veterans and rookies alike would glance at the photos of the ruined compound, the location she had infiltrated, and speak her name in hushed tones, acknowledging the skill required to move unseen, strike with precision, and vanish. Before anyone realized the act had occurred, they spoke of her as more than human, as a phantom that tested assumptions, patience, and knowledge simultaneously. Her existence became the standard by which others measured impossible missions, and the tale of the bullet that arrived before anyone saw her fire cemented her place in history as a living legend beyond reckoning and recognition. The world would never know the full extent of her presence, only the results. The impossible completed the shots, made the targets eliminated and the shadows left behind. She moved on from one mission to the next, unseen, unrecorded, but always calculated in the minds of those who knew she existed. Ghost had achieved the impossible and left behind a story that would grow with each retelling, a story of precision, patience, and invisibility of a single operative who could make the impossible possible, and in doing so became a legend whose name would live long after the echoes of her shots had faded. The legend of Ghost continued to grow long after the mission was complete. Her name whispered in the shadows of bases and training grounds across continents. Soldiers told stories of the impossible shot of a bullet that arrived before anyone knew. She had fired, and the woman who had executed it with absolute precision without leaving a trace? She became a symbol of skill, patience, and lethal efficiency, a standard against which all others measured themselves. Her presence in planning rooms, intelligence briefings, and battlefield simulations existed more as a concept than a person, a reminder that true mastery transcended recognition or fame. Even months later, the sniper team that had observed the mission replayed every moment in their minds, dissecting the angles, the trajectories, and the impossible timing. They attempted to rationalize the shot and her presence. But every calculation fell short. She had defied expectation and probability, leaving behind only results and a profound sense of awe. They spoke of her quietly to new recruits in the mess hall, describing her as a shadow who could strike from anywhere and vanish without notice, a figure that tested the limits of belief and inspired fear, respect, and obsession in equal measure. Commanders and strategists debated her existence and her methods, comparing her to legends of the past. Yet she was no myth. She was flesh and bone and calculation and instinct, a living testament to the heights of skill, a reminder that training, patience, and intuition combined could surpass technology and probability. The impossible had been made real by her hands, the bullet striking before observation was possible. The extraction flawless, leaving no trace of her presence. Her actions became case studies in precision, patience, and operational invisibility, taught in secret briefings to those deemed capable of understanding and applying her methods. In quiet moments, soldiers would look at photographs of ruined compounds or maps of missions gone awry and whisper her name. Ghost, a figure who existed outside the conventional rules of engagement, and yet shaped their reality, a constant reminder that skill beyond comprehension could exist, and that sometimes the unseen was more dangerous than the seen. Every target she had eliminated, every impossible shot she had made, became part of her legend. Each mission layered on the next, creating an aura of inevitability and perfection around her name. A figure both feared and revered, whose presence could never be fully understood, but whose results were undeniable. Her methods inspired a new generation of snipers and operatives who sought to emulate her precision, patience, and invisibility. Yet none could match the combination of experience, intuition, and mental discipline that she possessed. Her story became both a benchmark and a cautionary tale, a reminder that the impossible could be achieved, but only by those willing to surrender ego and operate beyond ordinary understanding. The bullet that arrived before anyone knew she had fired remained the defining example of her unmatched skill, a single action that crystallized her place in operational history. Even Allied intelligence units that had never seen her in person spoke of Ghost. In hushed tones, their analysts attempting to reverse engineer the thought process and calculations that must have gone into her operations. Their reports filled with admiration, frustration, and disbelief. They knew the impact of her actions extended beyond the mission itself, influencing enemy behavior, forcing adjustments in tactics, and creating a psychological effect that spread across theaters of operation. Without a single additional engagement, her name carried weight across borders, a living embodiment of the principle that the unseen could determine outcomes more decisively than the obvious. In bases where soldiers had witnessed the impossible, and in classrooms where instructors dissected it, Ghost became more than a person. She became a standard of perfection, patience, and invisibility, a benchmark for training, and a legend to inspire awe. Her name etched in memory, a reminder that skill beyond comprehension existed, that the impossible could be achieved, and that the results of such mastery often left no evidence except for the impact on the world that had underestimated the power of preparation, precision, and patience. Years later, even those who had trained and served alongside her still spoke of her as if she were a shadow that had passed through their lives, leaving nothing tangible, yet altering everything. Her story survived as a tale of skill beyond expectation, a narrative whispered in mess halls, briefings, and private conversations. The impossible shot that landed before anyone knew she had fired became a reference point for every aspiring marksman and strategist, a single instance of perfection that defined the legend of Ghost. A figure who had turned the impossible into reality without recognition, without trace, but with permanent effect. The world would continue to speculate about her missions, about the shots she had taken and the targets she had eliminated. Yet the truth was that she had no need for acknowledgement. Her satisfaction came from precision execution, from achieving what others deemed impossible, from moving through shadows unseen, and leaving only results behind. The impossible had been accomplished, and Ghost had become eternal. Not through fame or reward, but through the indelible impact of her actions, a phantom who existed beyond observation, whose legend would persist long after every bullet had struck and every eye had closed, leaving the world forever changed by a single silent operative who had mastered the art of the impossible.